My husband told me he was going to his college roommate's retirement dinner. He even showed me the invitation on his phone. Navy blue card, gold lettering, the kind of thing people print when they want the occasion to feel important. "Don't wait up," he said, and kissed me on the cheek, the way men do when they have already left the room in their minds. I had plans of my own that night. My friend Ruthann had been after me for weeks to come to her book club, and I had finally said yes, mostly to stop feeling like a woman whose whole social life fit inside her husband's calendar. I dressed up a little. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to feel like myself again. The restaurant they used for their monthly gatherings was a place called Harlow's on the north side of Millbrook, Georgia. Good lighting, real tablecloths, the kind of wine list that doesn't embarrass itself. I had been there twice before with my husband for our anniversary. He liked the scallops. Ruthann had reserved back room for the group, but she texted me while I was parking to say the private room had a pipe issue and they'd moved to the main dining area. I walked in through the front, gave my name to the hostess, and followed her toward the left side of the room. I saw him before he saw me. My husband of 38 years was sitting at a table near the window, not in any retirement dinner, not anywhere close to one. He was leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his jacket off, draped over the back of his chair, the way he only sits when he is comfortable, when he is not performing anything, when he believes no one who matters is watching. The woman across from him was my younger sister. I stopped walking. The hostess took 2 more steps before she realized I wasn't behind her. I don't know what my face did in that moment. I only know that something behind my eyes went very quiet and very cold at the same time, the way a house goes quiet when the electricity cuts out, and you realize how much noise you had stopped noticing. Her name is Constance. She is 54 years old. She has been to my home for Thanksgiving 11 times. She sat in my kitchen the morning after my mother's funeral and held my hand across the table. My husband's name is Warren. We have been married since the fall of 1987, when I was 26 years old, and believed that choosing carefully meant choosing safely. I am Miriam. I am 64 years old, and I stood in the entrance of Harlow's on a Thursday evening in October with my coat still over my arm and understood, in the space between one breath and the next, that something I had been living inside had already ended. I just hadn't been told yet. I turned around and walked back to my car. I did not cry in the parking lot. That surprises people when I tell them, but it shouldn't. Tears require a moment of disbelief, and I think some part of me, a part I had been shushing for longer than I wanted to admit, already knew the shape of what I had just seen. It recognized it. That was the worst part. It wasn't shock so much as confirmation arriving without permission. I sat behind the wheel for a long time. My phone had a text from Ruthann asking where I was. I wrote back that something had come up at home and I was sorry. Then I drove around for 40 minutes before I pulled back into my own driveway, walked inside, and sat down at the kitchen table in my good blouse. When Warren came home just before 11, I was still sitting there, book in my lap. Same page I had opened an hour ago. "How was the book club?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "How was the dinner?" "Long." He loosened his tie. "But good." Frank looked great. He kissed the top of my head and went upstairs. I listened to his footsteps cross the bedroom floor, heard the sound of the bathroom faucet running, and sat very still with my hands flat on the open book and asked myself one question. How long? Not whether. How long? Because the thing I had seen at that table was not a first. I understood that the way you understand when a floorboard gives under your foot, not because you tested it, but because your body measured the give and knew it wasn't new. Warren and Constance had not looked like 2 people crossing a line. They had looked like 2 people who had already forgotten where the line was. I did not go through his phone that night. I am not built for that kind of searching What I am built for is watching and remembering and letting the pieces come back to me in order once I stop forcing them away. I lay in the dark beside my husband and let my mind go backward. My sister's marriage ended 3 years ago. The divorce from her husband Raymond had been quiet and quick, the way divorces are when both people have already grieved the thing before the paperwork begins. She had moved into a condominium in Dunwoody, about 20 minutes from our house, and Warren had driven over twice that I knew of to help her with something furniture-related. I had thought nothing of it at the time. Warren was handy. Constance needed help. That was the story I filed it under and left alone. Now I took that story out and looked at it in a different light. He had gone without being asked. I remembered that now. I had mentioned that she was having trouble with a wardrobe that needed mounting, and before I had finished the sentence, he had said he'd take care of it. I had been grateful. That was what made me sick lying there in the dark. I had been grateful. I thought about the phone calls he took outside. Not many, not enough to flag at the time, but enough now to arrange themselves into something that had a shape. I thought about Thanksgiving 2 years ago when Constance had arrived late and flushed in the cold, and Warren had poured her wine without being asked while I was still in the kitchen. And I had looked through the pass-through and thought how nice it was that they got along well. After so many years of marriages that split families along fault lines, I had counted it as something I was lucky to have. I counted it wrong. By morning I had not slept more than an hour. Warren woke at his usual time, showered, made coffee, asked if I wanted eggs. I said I wasn't hungry. He didn't press. That was new, I realized. Once upon a time he would have made them anyway and set the plate in front of me. Men who are managing guilt manage everything a little less. They stop insisting on the small kindnesses because kindness requires presence, and presence requires honesty. I watched him back out of the driveway from the kitchen window, and then I picked up my phone. I called my daughter. Her name is Felicity. She is 37, she lives in Marietta, and she has her father's eyes and my tendency to go very still when she is working something out. I told her I needed to see her. She asked if I was all right. I told her the truth. Not entirely, I said. But I will be. I just need you. She was at my door by noon. I told her everything in order, without decoration. The book club. The hostess. The table by the window. The way Constance had leaned toward Warren, the way you lean toward a fire when you have been cold for a long time. Felicity is not a dramatic person. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always loved most about her, and when I finished, she set down her coffee cup and looked at the table between us for a long moment. "How long do you think?" she asked. "Long enough," I said. She looked up then, and I saw the thing moving through her face that I had felt in my own chest at that parking lot. The refusal. The revision. The ugly work of adjusting everything you thought you knew about your own life. "Aunt Connie," she said quietly. Just the name. Just like that. We didn't speak for a while after that. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying more honestly. What we did agree on was this. We would not confront either of them yet. We would watch. We would listen. And we would make sure that when the truth came out, it came out completely, not in pieces that could be explained away or softened or rearranged into something more forgiving than it deserved. That was harder than it sounds. The following Sunday, Constance came to dinner. She had been coming most Sundays for the past 2 years. I had been the one to start the tradition after her divorce because I didn't want her to spend her weekends alone. I had set that table for her 38 times. I had bought the good napkins she liked, the cloth ones with the embroidered edge, because she once mentioned she found paper napkins depressing. She came in carrying a bottle of Pinot Grigio and wearing a new jacket I hadn't seen before. Sage green, fitted at the waist, the kind of piece a woman buys when she is feeling observed in a way that pleases her. Warren kissed her cheek at the door. I watched his hand come to rest briefly on her shoulder. Not long, half a second, but natural. The way you touch someone whose body you have already mapped. I went back into the kitchen and stirred the sauce for something to do with my hands. Felicity came the following Tuesday with something concrete. She had not gone snooping, she said, and I believed her. She had been at a gas station on Route 9 near Constance's complex when she spotted Warren's car in the parking lot of the Mediterranean place across the street. She had driven past slowly. His car was still there when she looped back 20 minutes later. I sat with that for a day. Then I called my attorney. His name is Bernard Holt. I had used him twice before. Once when my mother's estate went sideways, and once when a contractor left our back addition unfinished and vanished. He was not a divorce attorney by specialization, but he knew who was, and more importantly, he knew how to be useful without being theatrical. I explained the situation plainly and asked what I needed to understand before I did anything else. He told me 3 things. First, Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally, and documented misconduct can influence the court's judgment. Second, I should not move any money or change any accounts without counsel. Third, I should begin paying attention to the financial picture I already had access to and note anything that had shifted in the past year or two without explanation. That last part gave me something to do. I had always managed the household accounts. That had been the arrangement since the beginning, not because Warren disrespected money, but because I was better at it. I paid the bills, managed the grocery budget, watched the quarterly statements. He handled his own business accounts separately, which had always seemed reasonable. What I had not been watching carefully was the brokerage account we held jointly. I opened the statement for the past 18 months that same evening and sat with it at the kitchen desk with a cup of tea going cold beside me. Nothing alarming at first glance, but I was looking with different eyes now. Patient eyes. Eyes that were no longer giving anything the benefit of the doubt. There were 4 transfers I could not place, not large, between $800 and $1,500 each, spaced out, irregular enough to look like routine fluctuation, but too consistent in their patterning once I lined them up. Each one moved into a personal account I recognized as Warren's, not our joint account, his private business checking. I made a note of the dates and said nothing. The second thing I found came from Felicity, who had a friend in property records and had done a search as a favor without my asking her to. A piece of land in Lumpkin County, about 70 miles north of us, had been put under contract 4 months ago. The buyer's name on the preliminary filing was Warren's. Land in the North Georgia mountains, rural, quiet, private. The kind of acreage people buy when they are planning something they do not want near the life they already have. I looked up the parcel online. 12 acres on a creek. The listing had been taken down, which meant the contract was likely proceeding. I called Bernard the next morning. He told me to keep documenting and to let him make a quiet inquiry. He also recommended I consult with a forensic accountant before we did anything further, because the transfers I had described were small enough to be accidental, but patterned enough to be intentional, and he wanted someone qualified to say which it was. I agreed to all of it. For the next 3 weeks, I moved through my own house like a woman still living her ordinary life. I made dinner. I watched television. I asked Warren about his week and listened to the answers with a face that gave him nothing, which was the most difficult thing I have ever done. Not because I wanted to scream, because I didn't. I had gone somewhere beyond screaming into a kind of cold clarity that almost frightened me. I was watching my husband the way you watch a stranger whose patterns you need to learn quickly for your own safety. He became more affectionate during those weeks. I noticed that too. more likely to reach for my hand during a movie, more likely to suggest a weekend drive, more likely to ask what I was thinking in the evenings. Men who are managing a secret often lean into the relationship they are betraying, not from guilt, from strategy. A wife who feels seen is a wife who is not looking closely. I let him believe it was working. Constance called me on a Wednesday night and talked for 40 minutes about her book, her neighbor's new dog, a podcast she'd been listening to about women in the 50s who had built businesses from their kitchens. She laughed easily. She asked about my knee, which had been giving me trouble. She told me she missed me and that she'd see me Sunday. I told her I was looking forward to it. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands flat against my knees and breathed through the thing that wanted to come up. Then I stood, went to the bathroom, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. My mother used to say that the women who survive the worst things are not the ones who feel the least. They are the ones who feel it completely and then decide what to do with it. I thought about her a lot during those weeks. I thought about all the things she had survived without making them into performances. She had been a quiet woman with an iron will, and I had spent most of my life thinking I took after my father. Standing in that bathroom in October, I understood for the first time that I was my mother's daughter after all. The meeting with the forensic accountant happened on a Tuesday morning. She was a woman in her early 50s named Frances Ott, Bernard's referral, and she had the kind of face that took in information without registering reaction, which I found reassuring rather than cold. She reviewed what I had and asked detailed questions about Warren's business structure, his sole proprietorship, the history of the transfers, the timing. She was careful and she was exact. Her conclusion 2 weeks later was that the transfers were not routine. The pattern she identified suggested they had been structured deliberately to stay below the threshold that would trigger automatic flagging on a joint statement, and the timing corresponded on 3 of 4 occasions with travel Warren had listed as business-related. She documented all of it. By then I had also spoken with a divorce attorney named Catherine Webb, whom Bernard had recommended specifically. She was 50 years old, and she had the manner of someone who had heard everything and remained unshakable in the face of all of it. She explained my position clearly. She explained what documentation would matter. She told me that when the time came, the meeting should happen in a controlled setting with counsel present, not at home, not in a moment of confrontation, but in a room where the shape of what had been done could be laid on a table and examined without anyone being able to rewrite it in real time. I had been thinking the same thing. I chose Thanksgiving, not the dinner itself. The day before, when I asked both Constance and Warren to come to the house early to help me prepare, which was something I did most years when I needed extra hands. Neither of them would find the invitation strange. They had no reason to. What they didn't know was that Felicity would be there and that Catherine would be joining us, not as an attorney making an entrance, but walking in from the study where she would be waiting once everyone was seated at the kitchen table. I asked Constance to come at 10 in the morning. Warren was already there as he lived there, but I sent him to the hardware store for something I said I needed for the table settings. He left at 9:45. He would be back by 10:30 at the earliest. That gave me time alone with my sister. She came in the way she always came in, through the side door I left unlocked, with a bag over one shoulder and the smell of her coat still cold from outside. She called my name the way you call the name of someone whose house you have moved through so many times it no longer feels like visiting. I was at the stove. I turned around and looked at her. She smiled. Then something in my face stopped her smile where it was. "What's wrong?" she asked. I said, "Sit down, Constance." She set her bag on the counter slowly. She sat. I came to the table and sat across from her. Felicity came in from the hallway and sat beside me without speaking. Constance looked at her, then back at me. "What's going on?" Softer this time. Already something in her going careful. I said, I was at Harlow's on October 9th. She went very still. I saw you, I said. I saw both of you. The silence that followed was not the silence of innocence. It was the silence of calculation. I watched it move behind her eyes, the quick, invisible work of a person deciding what version to offer. Confusion, misunderstanding, a different kind of explanation. She had probably rehearsed several without realizing it, the way guilty people do in the months between a close call and a discovery. "Miriam," she started. "Don't," I said. Her mouth closed. "I'm not asking you what happened," I said. "I'm telling you what happened," I said. "I'm telling you that I know, and I'm telling you that I know more than what I saw at that restaurant." Felicity set a folder on the table. Not dramatic, just placed it there. She didn't open it. Constance looked at the folder the way people look at something they recognize without wanting to. "How long?" I asked, and she answered, not immediately, not without a breath that cost her something, but she answered, 2 years, she said, almost. 2 years, almost. I had held my Sunday dinners for her for 2 years. I had bought the embroidered napkins she liked. I had asked Warren to help her with the wardrobe because I did not want her to feel alone. I did not cry. I had used up the crying in private. "You need to leave before Warren gets back," I said. "And you should know that everything I've found has already been shared with my attorney." She started to say something. I don't know what it would have been. I raised one hand slightly, and she stopped. Felicity walked her to the door. I sat at the kitchen table while the house was quiet and waited. Warren came in at 10:40. He was carrying a small bag from the hardware store, and he was in a good mood, the kind of unearned good mood that comes from a life that hasn't yet registered its own collapse. He set the bag on the counter. He looked around. "Where's Connie?" "She couldn't make it," I said. "Sit down." Something crossed his face. Not quite alarm. The version before alarm that a careful person feels when the room has changed without explanation. He sat. Catherine came in from the study. I had given her a key to the back door that morning. She carried a leather portfolio, and she introduced herself to Warren in the tone of someone whose work is already in progress. He looked at her. He looked at me. "What is this, Miriam?" "The beginning of a process," I said. "And you're going to want to listen." What followed was not a scene. I had not wanted a scene. I had wanted structure, and I had built one, and now it was simply doing its work. Catherine placed documents on the table the way the law places anything, not to wound, but to establish. The transfer records, the Lumpkin County land contract, the forensic accountant's findings, the dates aligned against his stated travel. Each one a piece of a picture that, taken together, did not allow for the word accident. Warren tried twice to interrupt. Catherine redirected him each time with the kind of calm that does not raise its voice because it does not need to. He went quiet. I looked at my husband across the kitchen table where we had eaten 38 years of ordinary mornings, and I said the one thing I had been waiting to say without flinching. "You didn't just break our marriage," I said. "You used my sister to do it." His face changed, not into remorse, into understanding. The kind that arrives not because a person feels it, but because they finally see that the other person has already moved somewhere they cannot follow. Constance had made her choices. Warren had made his. But what neither of them had counted on was that I had been making mine, quietly, for weeks, in the offices of people who put words like equitable distribution and documented misconduct into sentences that hold their shape in courts of law. Warren moved out the week after Thanksgiving. He went to a hotel first. Then I understood he moved into the Lumpkin County property once the sale cleared, which it did in December. He had been planning that for longer than I had known. Probably longer than he knew I would ever find out. The divorce took 11 months. Georgia does not require grounds for divorce, but documented financial misconduct and the Lumpkin property factored into our settlement in ways that Catherine had prepared me for and Warren had not prepared himself against. The house was mine. A significant portion of the brokerage account was mine. His attorney tried twice to renegotiate certain terms. Both times the documentation held. Felicity was with me the day the papers were finalized. We didn't celebrate. We had lunch at a quiet place near Catherine's office, and I ordered the soup because that was what I wanted, and we sat there for a long time without talking much, and that was exactly right. Constance and I have not spoken since the morning I told her to leave my kitchen. I don't know what I will do with that relationship eventually. I know what I will not do with it now. Some doors close and you learn to walk past them without reaching for the handle. Felicity calls every Sunday. She drives down once a month and we go to the farmer's market and she carries the heavy bag and argues with me gently about which tomatoes are worth the price. She is more like me than I ever told her. My knee is better. The physical therapist I finally started seeing said I had been compensating for weakness on one side for so long that my whole gait had shifted without my noticing. She said that happens. The body adjusts to an absence and calls it normal. I thought about that for a long time after she said it. I am 64 years old. I live in a house that is mine, in a city where I built my life, with a daughter who shows up and a garden that needs attention, and mornings that are quieter than they used to be, but honest in a way they were not before. I don't mistake quiet for emptiness anymore. I've learned the difference. Warren thought the hardest part of what he was doing would be the leaving. He hadn't considered the part where the person he left behind didn't break. That part surprised him. I could tell. The last time we were in the same room at the attorney's office, from the way he kept glancing across the table as if expecting to find someone diminished there, someone whose grief he had calculated as a variable, someone who would make the process harder by needing things from him. I didn't need anything from him. That was the one thing he had never planned for. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say it was seeing them together, or hearing Constance say 2 years, almost, at my own kitchen table. But the hardest part was the 3 weeks in between, the walking through my own house like nothing had shifted, the making of dinners, the answering of questions with a face that showed nothing. That was where the real work happened, in the silence I chose to keep while I was building something they couldn't see. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in any grand or abstract way, just in the practical sense that every choice a person makes sends something forward into the world, and eventually that something arrives back at them. Warren made choices for 2 years. Small ones first, probably. The kind that feel manageable in the moment because they haven't yet added up to anything you have to name. And then larger ones. The transfers. The land in Lumpkin County. A second life being assembled piece by piece while I bought embroidered napkins for my sister and set her a place at my table every Sunday. What they didn't account for was that I was paying attention, maybe not consciously at first, but the body keeps its own records. The mind notices things it doesn't know yet how to file. And when I finally had a reason to look clearly, everything was already there waiting to be read. I am not a vengeful person. I want to say that plainly because I think people sometimes confuse clarity with cruelty. What I did, what Felicity and I built together in those weeks, the documents, the attorney, the forensic accountant, the meeting at my kitchen table, none of it came from a desire to hurt anyone. It came from a decision to not be managed, to not let my own life be arranged around me without my knowledge or consent. There is a difference between revenge and refusal, and I chose refusal. What I learned from all of it, and I did not expect to learn this at 64, is that intelligence is not the same as education, and strength is not the same as loudness. I am not a lawyer. I do not have a background in finance. But I knew how to be still when stillness was what the situation required. I knew how to ask the right people the right questions. I knew that moving too fast would give them the thing they needed most, which was confusion to hide inside. So I waited. I watched. I built a case out of patience, which turns out to be one of the most underrated tools a person can have. Constance and Warren both believed, at some level, that I would come apart. That grief would make me loud and loud would make me manageable. That a woman of 64, discovering what I discovered, would reach for drama, because drama is what pain looks like from the outside. But grief, when you let it move through you completely instead of performing it, becomes something else on the other side. It becomes information. It tells you exactly what you are made of and exactly what you are no longer willing to accept. Felicity carries the heavy bag at the farmer's market now. She argues with me about tomatoes and drives down once a month and calls every Sunday. She is my evidence that I did something right, even inside a marriage that ended in a document on a table in a lawyer's office. I am not the same woman who walked into Harlow's that October night expecting to find her friend's book club. But I am more myself than I have been in a very long time, and that, I have decided, is not a small thing.